Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Figueiredos and I serve as the President of the Campaign for College Opportunity. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on our latest report, Access Denied, Rising Selectivity in California's Public Universities. As many of you know, the state of California is at a crossroads. The value of a college degree in the 21st century has never been higher. At the same time, more Californians are preparing for college and want to go, just as more employers are demanding better skilled workers. However, our public universities cannot accommodate all of the eligible students, and our state has failed to invest the resources necessary to expand college access to keep pace with this demand. Today's call will focus on the important findings from this report. In 2003, the Campaign for College Opportunity was founded by an unlikely group of business, civil rights, and education leaders concerned that California was not on track to provide the same higher education opportunities enjoyed by previous generations. And this report certainly affirms that. They were also equally concerned that our colleges and universities needed to do more to better serve the students they have and get them to a certificate, transfer, and/or degree. Our focus, as many of you know, is on college access, student success once in college, affordability, and equity. We hope that shining a light on the challenges facing young Californians who want to go to college will help toward ensuring that all eligible California students have a rightful spot in the state's public university system. Our report verifies that it is harder today to get into the UC and CSU. It's not an imaginary problem or one that just a few of us see up close when we're helping excited and nervous high schoolers fill out those college apps. This report provides important data on changing admissions patterns in the UC and the CSU system, the impact of state funding and enrollment caps, and offers up recommendations for addressing the challenges of educating our populace for 21st century jobs. Those of you who know me know this issue is very personal to me. The reason I'm passionate about the work of the campaign is because I was the first in my family to go to college. I see myself in today's students struggling to get an education because they know it's the only shot they have out of poverty or toward the career they deserve. They know that a high school diploma is not enough, and they deserve leadership that helps to make college a reality for them, not just a dream. You see, when I graduated from high school, I had a 3.5 GPA and an 1150 SAT score. Not at the top of my class, but pretty good, and I was lucky it wasn't so competitive back then to get into a good university. But Ruben Estrada is not so sure, and what he said to us rings true. If the world needs more engineers and he's passionate about being one, why are we making it harder? Sarah Jaime is lucky to have Miss Kim help her with applying to college, but it hasn't made the process less confusing or given her the confidence she deserves that she will land an acceptance letter. To discuss these challenges on our call today, you'll get to hear from Thomas Saenz, President and General Counsel of the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund and Chair of the campaign's Board of Directors, Eloy Oakley, President of Long Beach City College and University of California Regent, and Linda McGee, College Counselor at Downtown Magnets High School. Dr. Daniel Bird, our Policy and Research Director, and Dr. Rob Charette have taken the critical questions and concerns we raised about the challenges of getting into the UC and CSU and conducted stellar work in putting this report together. I'm grateful for their dedication and professionalism in conducting this research for the campaign. The UC Office of the President, Cal State Chancellor's Office, IPEDS, California Department of Ed, WICHE, and the 2012 American Community Survey were all important data sources for us. Of course, conducting good research is hard work, and for this report we secured the amazing participation of a few of our research advisory group members and other experts, including Nancy Shulock, Colleen Moore, Hans Johnson, Saul Geiser, Pam Birdman, Stephen Handel, Nina Robinson, Edward Sullivan, Mary Gill, Ginger Reyes, and Charles Maston. A big thank you to all of you. I also want to thank the Cal State University Chancellor's Office and the University of California for providing data, responding to lots of questions, and offering their own feedback to the report. So the big question is, why is it so much harder to get into the UC and CSU? Today I'll share a lot of key findings from this report, but they're all driven by 6 primary causes for why it is so hard. First, the 1960 master plan put enrollment caps in place. Only the top 12.5% of students would be eligible to attend the University of California. Only the top third would be eligible to attend the Cal State University. We've also experienced a tremendous population growth in our college-age population, and there's limited space physically on campuses. There's also been limited state funding and a huge increase in demand in terms of the number of students applying to college each year, and of course an increased demand by students and employers for those skills that a university education provides. So I'd like to introduce Thomas Sines, President of MALDEF and the Chair of the campaign's Board of Directors, to share a few thoughts on the importance of the issues addressed in this report. Tom?
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here in joining in the release of this report, Access Denied by the Campaign for College Opportunity. It comes at a critical time for the state of California. In a time when we hear more and more often that institutions of higher education around the country, in part in reaction to ratings and ranking systems published regularly, often seek to be more and more selective. But in fact, for a state like California, having our institutions of higher education be more and more selective is a major problem and impediment to our future success. As the number of UC campuses and CSU majors increases that use selective criteria for admission, it means that fewer and fewer of our homegrown California students have access and ability to complete their higher education in the state of California. This obviously has a civil rights dimension as well. This disinvestment by our state in higher education seats, this mismatch between the number of seats available and those seeking to fill them, comes at the same time that our population is growing increasingly diverse. In fact, as you all know, the state of California is now a majority-minority state. It has been majority-minority among those who are college age for many, many years. This means that just as more and more students from communities of color seek to enter California higher education campuses, they are being denied that access through selectivity in admissions. It also means that increasingly UC campuses and CSU majors are using some of the criteria for admission that have long shown a discriminatory effect on minority populations, particularly African American and Latino students, with no correlation between those admissions criteria and what it takes to succeed in college or beyond in career. This raises a civil rights concern that could become quite pronounced for the state of California if we continue down this road. It potentially means there will be legal challenges to admissions criteria used at both UC and CSU. It potentially means that too many students from minority populations will be discouraged from continuing on to higher education, or at least continuing on within the state of California. And it means ultimately that the broader problems created by increasing selectivity will become quite pronounced, particularly within minority communities. I'd like to take a moment to talk about what those broader impacts may be. As Michelle will surely explain, and as the report goes into in greater detail, the simple fact is California has a dire need today and in the future for a higher proportion of college graduates within its workforce. And if, as is true today, the major avenue of receiving such a college degree is by continuing through the California public higher education system, then increasing selectivity and the lack of seats, and specifically the denial of admission to thousands and thousands of students each year, becomes a problem for our meeting our future workforce needs. This means that our ability as a state to thrive economically and socially will be compromised. I think what you will see as you learn more about Access Denied, this important report, is that it demonstrates the serious future and civil rights concerns behind our current situation. There is simply no choice but to act, and to act quickly. Our state must choose to invest more in higher education, to ensure that there are more seats available for those who are applying, to ensure that we have admissions criteria that are fair and equitable to everyone, and to ensure that we are planning up front to meet the future needs of the state by creating the higher education seats and the degree completion that is necessary for our future success. I think you will find that this Access Denied report is a critical contribution and a call to action for all of us to ensure that our state is planning and pursuing a higher education policy that will serve us all most successfully. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Tom. So next, I just wanted to share a few quick logistics before we start sharing some of the findings from the report. You will be able to ask questions, and you can type those on the bottom left of your screen. You can also use our Twitter handle at CollegeOp, or my personal Twitter handle at MSCollegeOp. And just know that the hashtag for this report and the webinar is AccessDeniedCA. The webinar will be recorded and posted on our website and YouTube channel as soon as the recording has been edited. But you can find today all of the documents, including the infographic and the full report, on our website at collegecampaign.org. So first, I'd like to start by stating the obvious. The value of a college degree is huge, both to individuals and for the state of California. And while some folks may challenge how we can find the resources to fund more Californians and their spot in a four-year university, I like to remind our state policymakers of the high return on investment for that spending, and the similarly high cost on our state budget when we don't educate our people. In fact, for every dollar invested in higher education, there is a $4.50 return. Educated Californians pay more taxes, and they cost less in terms of social services and spending by the state. So as stated earlier, the 1960 Master Plan for Higher Education, incredibly innovative for its time, defined eligibility for students into our public colleges and universities and the role that such campuses would play at educating our population. But times were very different in the 1960s, where it made a lot of sense for only the top third of high school graduates to go to a four-year university. And today the reality is more and more high school grads are eligible for the UC and the CSU. This chart shows you the growing number of young people and the growing number and percentage, 42% of whom are completing the A through G course requirements in high school so that they can apply to the University of California and the Cal State system. Young people know that getting more than a high school diploma is necessary. We reviewed admissions to the UC, and here you can see the basic requirements to get into the University of California. But while those are the basic requirements, as more students apply and competition increases, and we have found a growing gap between those applying to the UC and those enrolling. We also found that 6 of the 9 UC campuses had a median GPA, grade point average for high school students, over a 4.0 for those students who were admitted. And the SAT scores are also off the charts. You can see that students applying to UCLA, UC Berkeley, and UC San Diego are almost perfect in terms of their SAT score. This growing competition, coupled with insufficient funding from the state of California for the UC, has meant that we are not keeping pace with the possible growth of California students, while the tuition revenue of out-of-state and international students has significantly increased the number of those students in the UC. Even Governor Brown seems to understand this problem, but we are nowhere near fixing it. Eloy Oakley, president of Long Beach City College and a new gubernatorial appointee to the UC Board of Regents, joins us to share his reactions. Eloy?
Thank you, Michelle, and good morning to everyone. And I want to begin by thanking the campaign for all the work that it's doing around this very important issue. I want to first echo many of the thoughts that Tom Sines had previously. This is certainly a civil rights issue, but it's also, and in some ways, very important to the state of California, an economic issue. The very students that we're talking about that are being locked out of access are the students that we need to have access to our public education, higher education system, because they are our economic future. So how do we do that? This report certainly outlines the challenges that we face for any new applicant, whether that be a freshman admit to the University of California or a transfer student. The demand for attending the University of California is great, and that is a good thing. We have a premier University of California public education system. But that demand and the lack of access in terms of capacity is creating an enormous amount of selectivity. So how do we combat that? First, in my mind, we have to continuously look at how we admit students to our public university system, whether that be the UC and the CSU. As the data points out, the median GPA is going through the roof. The SAT scores are going through the roof. So what is really a meaningful indicator of college readiness and the ability of a student in California to be successful at the University of California? I think we need to continue to challenge those notions, particularly placement exams or admission exams like the SAT. We have an opportunity right now through the implementation of the Common Core. There is work being done now to develop the smarter balanced 11th grade assessment tests. I think that gives an opportunity to better gauge the preparedness of students for the University of California. I think we should take this as an opportunity to look at our admissions practices, both at the University of California and the CSU, to determine what is the best way to find talent in our neighborhoods throughout California. And also, I think we need to look at the opportunities that are already coming online. So for example, the University of California recently launched its Transfer Pathway Initiative. I think we in the public and as educators need to ensure that we do everything possible to align the community college transfer curriculum with the University of California to allow more students to gain access and to be able to navigate that access as readily as possible. I think we have a great example in the CSU Transfer Associate's degree model. We need to replicate that for the UC. The other thing is, recently at this last UC Regents meeting, the UC announced that it's opening up 10,000 slots to Californians over the next 3 years. This gives us an excellent opportunity to look at how we admit students, to open up that net to Californians, and to capture as many of them as possible and allow them the opportunity to succeed in the University of California. I think we need to really pay attention to how the UC is going to handle this, how the K-12 is going to handle this, and how community colleges are going to handle this window of opportunity. It is not just the UC in admitting more students, but it's also the community colleges and the high schools working to make sure that we have aligned the curriculum to allow more students to navigate that pathway. And then the final thing I'll say is, at the end of the day, it's about capacity. We are doing everything we can to increase the college preparedness of our high school students, and we are doing a good job of that. We need to ensure that the legislature allocates enough resources to open up access at the UC and the CSU for these students. We are asking a lot of these students in K-12 and community college, and if they do the right thing, we need to ensure that we open up the door for them and allow them access to our public universities. So I think those are the things that I'd like us to think about as we go beyond this webinar and this report, and continue to work day in and day out to ensure that we use this window of opportunity to really change the way we gain access for our students to our public higher education systems. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Eloy. And we certainly agree. If students do what we've asked of them, we should certainly not make it harder for them to find that seat. We're now going to share some findings related to the Cal State University. Now, while the UC was always intended to be a highly selective institution, that is not the same for the Cal State system. The basic CSU requirements do provide some guidance for high school students to prepare for university experience. And there's been a huge increase in the number of students doing just that, as you saw in a much earlier slide. And here on this slide, you can see the incredible growth in the number of high school students applying to the CSU system. So again, as more students get prepared, the average GPA and SAT scores have increased for the Cal State applicant pool. And even more concerning is the number of Cal State campuses that, in response to this increased competition and preparation by students, have raised the bar for admission. In fact, 6 campuses now have a higher than the minimum admissions requirement for every single major on their campus. That's Fresno State, Cal State Fullerton, Cal State Long Beach, Cal State San Diego, San Jose State, and San Luis Obispo. And more campuses are getting closer to having a majority of their majors also declared impaction, which means they raise the admissions bar for those particular majors. What is most challenging is how much more complicated this increased competition and raising of the admissions bar becomes for students trying to find the right college and major for themselves. This confusion is not good. And as the admissions bar is raised, too many eligible students can't even get in. In fact, almost 140,000 CSU eligible students were denied admission because of state funding to provide them a spot on campus was simply not there. Since 2009, the number of students turned away each year is shocking. Linda McGee, a college counselor at downtown Magnets High School, is going to share what this looks like on the ground and for her students. In fact, she's closed her door even though she has a line of students waiting to get assistance, because today, as many of you know, is the deadline for students to submit their college applications to the Cal State and the UC. So Linda, thank you for making time for us, and we promise we're not going to keep you away from all of those worthy students that need your help.
Thank you. And I would also like to say that students should not wait until the day that applications are due to have problems, but that just seems to happen. Anyway, my school, Downtown Magnets, is a part of LA Unified. LA Unified made a big drive, very public drive, to have all their students fulfill the A through G requirements as graduation requirements, along with a couple of extra state things. And I see that more and more students are fulfilling this requirement, and they are supposedly eligible for the Cal State and UC systems according to the minimum requirements. However, almost no one who meets the minimum or just above the minimum is finding acceptance in the campuses that they want to go to, or the ones that they're at least supposed to be eligible to attend. Starting with the UCs, extremely difficult to get into the UCs compared to how it was. I've been a counselor now since 2000, and I've been a college counselor exclusively since 2005 at my school here. So I have seen, with a pretty similar demographic of students, most of my students are high achieving, but they are low income, and they are first generation, mostly, students of color. And these students are finding that even though the basic requirements have not changed in the time that I've been a counselor, the flexibility has changed. Meeting the minimum is just not, that's a worthless thing to do. It doesn't work. It's not going to work for you. So as a result, students who would have gone on to UC in years past are lucky to get a place at a Cal State. Students who would have gotten into Cal States are finding themselves locked out, and so they're going to community college. And what this is doing is it's pancaking down. And it's not just financial. That's always a part of it because costs have raised as well. But it's causing students to limit their options, and it's also locking kids out of that tier that would have been able to attend. So as a result, you have less students being able to get into college. And sometimes when things happen at the end of the year, there is no flexibility that there used to be. For example, if a student ends up with a D in an A through G course at the end of the year, there's no option to make it up in the summer, and their admission is immediately revoked. It used to be that schools would be flexible and allow students, as the private schools still do, and many other out-of-state colleges that are public and private, will allow that student to either do something in the summer or somehow still be able to start in the fall. But that is not happening here any longer at all. I have not been able to find a school to be flexible in that way any longer because the line behind that student is so long. We now have waiting lists. This is a concept we did not have just a few years ago. And at the Cal State system, there have been changes that have affected my students very personally within this past year. For example, Cal State Northridge was considered a local school for downtown magnets, and now it is not. Now, the thing that is particularly strange about that is that we are a magnet school. Our students attend from the entire district. So we have students who live in Northridge who now are not local to Cal State Northridge. So they could literally walk to the school and they are not considered local. And that is bizarre. But that is a result of this new we're too crowded to take everyone concept. So now our students have Cal State LA only as an option with the majors that are impacted in the areas that my students want to go into. And it makes it very, very difficult. So those students are now going to community college. And if you look at the numbers for successful transfer for first-gen students of color from the community colleges, the numbers are abysmal. And not just because of the frustration of getting classes, which obviously is a big part of it, but also because for my students, they're the problem solvers many times in their families. They are the ones who fix things, who call the light company when there's a problem, who get extensions on bills. They are there for their family, sometimes as the only fluent English speakers. So as a result, living at home and attending community college and not having a chance to have an on-campus experience means that they are pulled in to every family crisis that occurs. And as a result, they may find they need to take time off from school, and a semester can turn into a year, can turn into a lifetime. And those students will never be able to complete their education, or at least not as a young person without other responsibilities like families of their own. It's become a case where students are turning on each other in a sense because of the selectivity. And they know that their friend is now their competitor and could be the person who keeps them out. The Wall Street Journal published a very good article November 16th, which I didn't understand how bad it was, but they said that the UC systems accepted 62% of their in-state applicants in 2014 compared to 84% back in 2010. And this is a very sad state. But the other thing that really interested me is that when they did an analysis of what's happening, because it's easy to blame the international students for taking the spaces away, but in other states, they're still accepting their in-state students at the numbers that they were before, even with increased admission of international students. So what I am doing is the only thing I can do as a good college counselor to support my students is I am recommending them, I am imploring them to look at private and out-of-state options. Consider going to Nevada. to Utah, to Arizona, where they have a place for you. And it's sad that your parents have paid taxes and been a part of the system that doesn't seem to have room for all of you. But there are other places that do. Utah, for example, we have a relationship with a college there that has over 50% of their bachelor's degrees being finished, unlike ours. And yet, they have state universities with open admission policies, open admission, like our community college, so that students can get in there with their high school diploma. So all I'm saying is it's gotten bad, and we need to be able to offer more to our students who are residents of our own state. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And I think it's tough for all of us to hear how much harder it is and what kind of advice you're forced to give. But thank you for your time. So I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the important role our community colleges play in terms of serving the majority of undergraduates in our state. And as many of you know, one of their primary functions is to transfer students into the UC or CSU. So you might be asking, is community college the solution to these big challenges that we face? And here you can see that community college enrollment has skyrocketed, with over 1.4 million students attending one of the 112 community colleges in California. Yet despite this large number of students, every year only 57,000 to 64,000 students transfer. So clearly transfer needs to be strengthened, and our efforts to streamline transfer in 2010 with the passage of Senate Bill 1440, the Associate Degree for Transfer, is a major solution to this work that must be fully implemented to address this challenge. We have to grow freshman first-year enrollment at our four-year universities, but we also have to make sure that more of our students are prepared and successfully able to transfer into both the University of California and the Cal State system. And with the growing preparation and effort to streamline transfer, we are going to start to see challenges for them as well in finding a seat at the University of California and the Cal State system if we don't address these capacity challenges. So we can't talk about admission standards in isolation. In fact, the state of California, both its funding and policies, have been instrumental in shaping our university system. From the Master Plan of 1960, which defined eligibility to the state funding that we provide for higher education. And funding has recently been on the rise, but this chart really shows you what a huge decline in funding during the Great Recession that has happened for the UC and the CSU, and clearly we've not fully recovered from. And all of you know that one of the major results of these huge cuts in state funding to the universities has meant huge increases in tuition until the recent enacted freeze for both UC and CSU students. The bottom line is our state simply does not send enough students directly into our four-year universities, and we rank really poorly compared to other states. So here you can see that we're 49th in the country in four-year college enrollment and 45th in the country in the rate of bachelor's degree completion. Of course, it doesn't have to be this way. This chart right here shows you just how badly we rank compared to other states in terms of four-year university enrollment. And the reason this chart is important is because the more students you send directly to a four-year university, the more bachelor's degree completions you get. So what can you do? How can you support solutions that strengthen our colleges and universities? I think you all know that the campaign is always focused on raising challenges but offering solutions, whether it's advocating for greater funding for higher education, fixing the college transfer process, advancing policy reforms that focus on improving student outcomes. We're certainly still excited and optimistic about the possibilities of courageous leadership that looks at the reality of today, perhaps through the eyes of one of our young people struggling to go to a UC or CSU and thinks there has to be a better way. Just as a master plan for higher education set the gold standard for higher education in the world in the 1960s, we're long overdue for a bold vision for higher education that looks to the needs of our state today and the necessary human capital investment required and does something relevant about it for the 21st century. So the recommendations we offer is that the governor and legislature need to provide and develop a statewide plan for higher education that has these findings in mind. We should be revising the master plan enrollment cap. Sending the top third of our students to a four-year university is simply not enough. Immediately, we could fund the UC and the CSU to serve all eligible students. The UC should continue and further cap out-of-state and international students. As a UCLA alum, it's distressing to me that a third of the freshman class in 2014 were non-resident Californians. The CSU should really work immediately to ensure that impaction is clearly understood. We talked about how confusing it has become for students in terms of whether or not they'll be guaranteed a spot at one of their campuses of choice. And we would hope that the Cal State system would actually review impaction and the impact it has on a regular basis. Is there disparate impact on certain communities, in certain neighborhoods for students because of these practices? And finally, the CSU should construct a formal referral process for eligible students who don't get admitted but could qualify for a spot at another Cal State campuses near them. So now we're going to take some questions, and as we shared earlier, you can type them into the chat box at the bottom left of your screen. And Audrey Dow on my team is going to raise the questions, and we'll try to get through and answer as many as possible in the next 30 minutes.
Thank you, Michelle. We have a number of people who are starting to ask questions via the chat function, and so I'm going to start off with a question from Brandon Robertson, who asks, why not allow community colleges the ability to award four-year degrees?
Great question, and I think as some of you may know, there is a pilot effort in place where some community colleges are offering four-year degrees in fields of study that are not currently being offered by a Cal State or a UC campus nearby. We didn't dig too deeply into that as a potential solution, but primarily because we do see that there's so big capacity problems at the four-year institutions that we really need to grow capacity at those campuses. And community colleges serve multiple functions, and we do have concerns about their ability to award certificates and degrees to a lot of their students. We've done analysis of student outcomes from community colleges, and I think it is disconcerting that not enough students who start at a community college end up finishing. So one of our concerns is how do we improve the pathway from community college to four-year university first? How do we make sure the students that go to community college to earn a two-year degree and certificate actually do that? But Eloy, if you're still on the call with us, maybe you'd like to also add to that.
Sure, Michelle, and I echoing your points as well. Ultimately, the way we're structured in California really focuses on the distinct missions of each segment. The mission of community colleges is really something that is focused on certificates, degrees, associate degrees, and preparing students to transfer. So rather than shift the focus to community colleges to offer more baccalaureate degrees, which in the end still requires additional investment, we already have the mechanism to offer more baccalaureate degrees, and that really lies within the existing structure of our higher educational master plan. CSU and the UC are already there. There's, in my mind, no point to duplicating effort to creating a whole new mission for community colleges when we already have the place where we can increase the capacity. So I'd say until we exhaust the capacity of the CSU and the UC, I don't think it makes sense to shift efforts to the community colleges, because really it takes several years to build programs to get them accredited. And in the meantime, we have students in the pipeline now that just require an additional investment on the part of the legislature to open up more slots in the UC and the CSU.
Thank you, Eloy.
Thank you both. We have another question from Don Digrius, who asks, where will the funds come from to increase the number of students in the CSU or UC? Do we wish to redirect funds from other budget lines?
Great question. I think that is the biggest challenge facing the governor and policymakers, right? There isn't unlimited funds. To increase four-year university enrollment will require a huge investment of money. I think we are recovering from what was a terrible recession that hit our state. We believe that this information makes the case that certainly more funding than what has been made available should be going to our higher education systems. And I think that's what we elect leaders in our state to do, to figure out how to put forward a plan to identify resources, whether it's utilizing Prop 30 extension or other tax revenue sources to fund higher education, figuring out the right balance by which students pay for their share if they can afford to in terms of college access. So I think that is the question and the challenge that we have to pose to policymakers. And my hope is that just because it's difficult and it will require greater money, that it not be ignored, which I think is what unfortunately we have been doing for the last several years. Tom or Eloy, would you like to add?
Hi, Michelle. It's Eloy. I would just say that that is certainly a challenge. Part of this equation isn't all about more resources. It's about looking at how we serve students currently within the existing institutions. And is there a way that we can increase capacity with the existing funds? The UC is doing that. I know that there are many efforts underway to look at 3-year degree plans to improve the transfer pathways, to improve admissions, and we are opening up the doors to 10,000 more Californians over the next 3 years. So it's going to take both the legislature and the governor and his team looking at how we find additional resources to open up capacity, but it's also incumbent upon our institutions of higher education to continue to be more efficient with the resources that we have.
Thank you, Eloy. Leanne Miller writes, really in agreement with Linda McGee, who spoke earlier. Linda, I'm an independent counselor, and everything you presented was right on target. I'm recommending to my students to look out of state as well, as I've seen so many highly qualified students being denied admission to the UC but are admitted to out-of-state public institutions and are often given outstanding academic scholarships. We will see a brain drain from California, as many of these students will not come back after graduation. How do we as a state reverse this trend?
Audrey, did you want Linda to answer that question?
Yeah, Linda, if you're still on, that would be great.
Yes, I am. I wasn't sure if that was directed towards me. Well, for those of us who are of a certain age and came through the California school system, the flow into college was not one that everyone felt they had to do. There were a lot less of us going to college, but we could go directly in. It was so much easier. There was so much access. There was so much room. So I think the most important thing that we can do to keep our students here is to offer them a place and to make it affordable. The students that I'm dealing with mostly are students who are going to need help, but they're going in the end to contribute. Now with my students, most of them will return because their families are here and their families depend on them. And these are the ones that are going to change the trajectory of their family. They are going to take their families from struggling low-wage earners who worry about how to make it from check to check to living a lifestyle where they can pay their bills, they can possibly buy a home, they can pull up the rest of their family to them, and then that next generation of kids, there won't be a question that they're going to school somewhere. The middle class students are the ones you really need to worry about in terms of them going somewhere and not coming back, because they're going to be more mobile. They may have parents who are first-gen students, but they're not. They're in a different place. They don't feel as tied to this place. So I don't have all the answers, because a lot of this has to do with money that I can't control. I'm certainly not the person who has the purse strings. And I do realize that there are many, many things pulling on those purse strings besides higher education. But if we want our state to move forward, and we want all these young people to be able to contribute and do the same kind of things that my generation has done, they have to be given the tools to do it. And pulling yourself up by your bootstraps with a high school education just doesn't cut it anymore. So we have to make more room.
Thank you so much, Linda. We have a question from Angela, who asks, do other states have a plan that addresses the similar issues California is facing? Would we be able to use those plans as a guide for California? Michelle?
Well, more than 30 other states do have a very clearly articulated public agenda for higher education. In Texas, which is one of the examples I like to share, they have a plan called Closing the Gaps that they've had in place for the last 15 years. They just doubled down on that effort. And Closing the Gaps not only put forward an agenda to increase the number of students that go to college, but was also very specific about increasing the number of Latino students and Black students, who are a growing proportion of their population, who are prepared, go to college, and actually graduate once they're there. And they've articulated specific goals for every single one of their community colleges and universities. I don't think that it would be too bold to ask California to do the same thing in light of some of the similar challenges we face and the huge gaps that continue to persist for our most diverse young Californians.
Thank you, Michelle. Craig Hayward has a question, and he asks, what is the current physical capacity to enroll students in the CSU, in the UC? If and when enrollment does ramp up, how quickly will those two systems max out their facilities? Eloy?
Well, that is a good question. Certainly, I can only speak to discussions that are being had at the University of California, and I know the CSU has similar issues. There is definitely a physical capacity challenge in both the UC and the CSU. The CSU and the UC we have not had a statewide ballot measure for facilities in a number of years that allows the CSU and UC to add more capacity in terms of physical capacity. So, I mean, and we're being as creative as possible. Most recently, the regions adopt the 2020 master plan for UC Merced to allow it to build out as quickly as possible. There is risk associated with that because UC has to finance it itself. But I think both systems are doing everything possible to add as much physical space as necessary. Now, having said that, there is a tipping point at which if we can't address the physical space, and not only classroom space, but student housing and all the other functions that go with addressing the needs of students. So we really do have to address this in whatever conversations we're having of increasing access. In the meantime, though, we are doing everything possible to increase the capacity within the existing resources, and I think the more that we do that, the more of a challenge it's going to be to provide for the student support services that ultimately require more state resources.
Thank you.
Michelle, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say that's why the number one recommendation that we need a plan is so important, because part of a plan would look at issues of capacity and raise the questions that Eloy just shared. And part of the challenge is also making sure, how do our university systems change the way that they do things to serve more students? And I don't want it to get lost that although this report is focused on access and admissions, that very much we expect and would push for and press the reality that these students don't just deserve to get into the door, that they have to get out of the door with a college degree that they've earned.
Thank you, Michelle. And we're going to take one more question, and that question's from David Walker, who asks, would you say these issues suggest a corporatization of public education in California? A lot of these issues resemble tuition hikes of private colleges that have begun to operate more like corporate businesses rather than institutions for learning. Eloy or Michelle?
I was going to toss it to Tom. Tom, from your perspective, is that a question you want to tackle?
I think that the issue really is more one of disinvestment by government in higher education. I do think that, of course, as we've heard in many different ways, public institutions of higher education do find themselves, if you will, in competition with private institutions. Most of those are, of course, nonprofit private institutions. But more than a concern about corporatization, I think it is the disinvestment of resources in higher education. And as we've heard, and as has been eloquently addressed by Michelle and by Eloy, there are both avenues of addressing this on the revenue side and avenues on the expenditure side in terms of making our higher education institutions more efficient. I think that efficiency might be termed by some as corporatized. I don't see it that way. I think it's necessary in the modern age, in the 21st century, to teach the number of students that we need to teach and get them to degree completion. Sometimes it's good to take what might be called by some corporate approaches, but that are really more about efficiency and using them. But it is unquestionably also a question of revenues and our lack of investment in higher education as a state. Now, I'm not going to suggest that that's limited to higher education. As I think you've heard and as has been discussed, so many of the students that we're talking about are from low-income families, first-generation college students, and for many of them, the other issues that government invests in, the services, whether that's public transportation, to social services, to healthcare, the other things that government invests in are equally important to these students and their families. So it's not a matter of diverting revenues. It really is a matter of gaining more revenues, investing a significant portion of them. I'm not saying a higher proportion than anything else, but a significant amount of those new revenues in higher education, and then ensuring that they are used in an efficient way to meet the needs of the state of California.
Thank you, Tom. So with that, we are going to summarize this call. You know, as you saw, our report shared with you key findings on growing competition that California high school grads face when applying to the UC or the CSU, and the role of state funding and policies which prevent greater access to our four-year universities. The findings in our report are disconcerting at a time when both students and their families are more interested than ever in college access, and employers are demanding better skilled workers. We're falling short in preparing Californians to succeed. This report is important because unless we address the growing gap between the workforce needs of the 21st century and the inadequate capacity to serve more students at our UCs and CSUs, the future of our state is in peril. Again, thank you for joining us today. We hope you share these findings, and most importantly, we hope you join us in pressing for solutions. Eloy, Tom, and Linda, thank you also for making time. And we're signing off so that Linda can go help more students that deserve their spot in the UC and the Cal State finish their applications today so that they can get it. Thank you all and have a great day.